The subject of today's webinar is Why Can't I Find My Family? Digging deeper on surnames. Our presenter is Laurie Castillo, who's an accredited genealogist and a great researcher and teacher. Appreciate her willingness to share her skills with us. I'll now turn the time over to Laurie. Laurie?
Welcome. And I began my genealogy career unknowingly. As a young person, I was very fascinated with names, given names, surnames, and that's what really drew me to it. And when I thought about what classes would be most important to do, I realized that when you're starting a research, if you don't have a surname, you don't have anything. It doesn't matter all the other things you know. So you need to learn more about surnames so you're not missing your family in the records and in the indexes that have been made to those records. So here we go. Okay, so what today I'm presenting for you is a whole lot of resources for learning more about ancestral surnames. And next week, I'll be doing another class in this same vein, and we'll be talking about surname distribution maps. Okay. So many names have changed as immigrants strove to fit into their lives in a new land. Understanding where your surname came from and what may have happened to it along the way should increase your overall research success. Each country or ethnic group in that country will have had their own naming history. What do you need to know to find your family? The thing I wanted to also mention was, like I said, next time we'll discuss surname distribution mapping websites. And keep in mind that many of those websites that have mapping capability also have additional information about surnames in general. I did not repeat those websites in this syllabus. This syllabus is already 11 pages long. So coupled with the syllabus you'll get next time, you'll have most of my resources on surnames. First, we'll talk about websites with general surname resources and sites that cover multiple countries. To arrive at the FamilySearch wiki, you can Google FamilySearch wiki and a country name, or you can log into FamilySearch and select search and then wiki. And at this world map page, select a continent and drill down to the country of your choice. At the country page, you want to select the topics, personal names, languages, word list, those types of things. So let's show you an example of that. Here we are at the Netherlands genealogy page, and you can see off to the side the beginning research and then the record types that you can click on. If you scroll down even further, you come up with the background topics, and you can see the two topics there, names, geographical, and personal names. Okay, so personal names is what we're going to click on there. There's also a Dutch word list, if you see that right here. And they also have a section on languages, okay, because that's sort of going to be important to understanding name construction. All right, so here we are at the Netherlands personal names, and you can see that there's a table of contents up the top, and then the very first thing below the tip there is online tools. So there's a whole lot of websites you can go to, resources you can go to help you there. So here's a couple of those. Here's some things about surnames, a lot of people don't really realize that the Netherlands had patronymic surnaming up until 1792. And at that point in time, Napoleon said, enough of that, get a name. So he made it legally necessary to record an actual surname, a non-changeable surname. And they have records in the Netherlands. You see there are those name adoption records where people had to go in and report what their choice was and have that name permanently assigned to them. So you need to get to know what the naming history of your particular country or location is. There's some more topics under this section here about historical development, like I was mentioning. So anyway, and then they have a for further reading section where they have even more resources you can click on. So that's an example of what that looks like on the FamilySearch wiki. So this is a look at FamilySearch catalog, using the catalog to locate records dealing with surnames. So all I did here was put in the Netherlands, keeping along with my Netherlands example. And as you scroll down alphabetically through the topics, I decided to go down, and there is a names personal section there. You can see all of these various work on the surnames, the meaning of Dutch surnames, foreign surnames in the Netherlands, encyclopedia of names. It goes on. And then they have one personal name dictionary as well. So that's another way you can learn more about the surnames. Some of these, as you click on them, may actually be part of the FamilySearch books, where you can go through them page by page right online, maybe even download them. Always want to check that out. Another place, so here's that FamilySearch digital library, the books. They call it books on the ribbon, but they call it digital library when you get to it. I wish somebody would pick one. And if you search here, you'll be searching the digital book collections of the FamilySearch library and its 16 partners. These are major libraries. There's something like over 500,000 books and resources in here so far. So you can just do a search on the country and surnames or whatever and see what you turn up with. This is another FamilySearch link about surname meaning and origin. Doesn't give you a lot of depth, but it might give you a clue as to where, if you have no idea. I wanted you to know about this 88-page booklet that's free to download. It's called A Guide to Names and Naming Practices. This was produced in England in 2006, but it covers vast areas of the world. It's like a handbook. It looks like it was a handbook that was developed for maybe their ambassadors or something, so they don't mess up names when they're dealing with people from other countries. They're respectful. It is really interesting, and it has an explanation of how the book works. They color coordinate some of the material in the book. Let me see if I can show you an example here. This is explaining the different ways that a family surname might come about. And they have a different color for each part of a name and each kind of a name. And so we'll have an example here and you'll see how this works. So this is how you choose the country. You can see these are live links. This is an electronic booklet. And so it breaks the world down into its continental areas. It doesn't, not every country, but a lot of countries, probably all the ones that Britain has something to do with, for sure. And when you just click on whatever country you choose, and I chose Poland, and you can see that this is telling you that in Poland, it's personal name, then family name. This is the order in which names are spoken. And then it gives you some really important information about the endings of their surnames. They have masculine and feminine endings in Polish surnames and a lot of the Eastern European Russian names. So it kind of gives you some basics about that, which I found really helpful. This is a website called Behind the Name, the Etymology and History of Surnames. It's a great place to learn more about surnames. You can type in a specific surname in this box here, or you can choose a country below and just, if you want to learn more about the types of surnames in that particular location and drill down that way. So you can work it either way, by name itself or by location. These are the countries that they have information about. I should say countries or ethnicities, because some of these are ethnicities. So for instance, this Occitan here. Oh, it's actually Occitan. It's a language spoken in parts of France, Italy, Monaco, and Spain. That's more of an ethnicity than a location. So you'd follow it that way. Anyway, there's more information for these other areas of the world as well in that booklet. So nice thing, free, it's all good. Behind the names also has a section for place names. And just to share, as soon as you get straightened out on the surname, you'll probably have similar types of challenges with the place name, because the same sorts of things happen to place names that happen to surnames. And so this is a place where you can put in a location and see if you can drill down and locate it if you need to do that. You can see down here by type, countries, political subdivisions, regions, settlements. Kind of an interesting thing. This is the Cultural Atlas website. You can explore different cultures, and part of that exploration is their naming. You can see my arrow pointing to the naming block after I chose Austria. So it says information on naming conventions and practices. This is the BYU script tutorials. If you scroll down this page, you will come to the list of the available tutorials. There's currently 8 available, and those are Dutch, Old English, French, German, Italian, Latin, Portuguese, and Spanish. And they say here, right here at the center of the bottom, Russian is coming soon. I chose German because that's the one I've used the most, and it's the oldest one of all of the tutorials too, or the first one that was developed. So when you get into whatever one you choose, it'll go something like this. It has sections. There are documents that you can practice with, techniques and tools they help you with, an alphabet, because you need to learn what the alphabet is for that particular country, and the diacriticals and marks that might be involved with that language. They have interactive experiences where you can, they make these little tests for you to see and help you learn to identify the letters. They have an animated letter section so you can see how they're drawn, which will help you with handwriting. They have words and passages tests that you can practice. And this is essentially what I did to really beef up my ability to work with German documents. So under given names and surnames for Germany, there are 3 links that are very helpful. The first 2 are lengthy lists of common German and given and surnames. It kind of helps if you just look through these kind of lists so you kind of know what to expect, what things will look like. The 3rd link is to a chart of given names written in script. And this is important because it's through, this is how you will learn best to read the old handwriting, by using the given names, because you can learn to recognize Johann and Maria and Anna and Georg. You can learn to recognize those. And when you learn to that'll help you learn to recognize the uppercase and the lowercase letters. And then you can apply them to surnames that you would be less familiar with. And it really helps. So these script tutorials have examples of names written out, as I mentioned, in more than one handwriting style. And you can see how helpful that would be to help you figure out surnames by using the given names. This is Cindy's list. This is a list of categories at Cindy's list. And from here, you could click on the names category. Right here, it says there are 163 hits, at least. Okay. Other, you could go to, I chose Germany, however, and I found the topic names in the category languages, names, and names, handwriting, and script. So you see that right there. So that's what you want to look for to find Cindy's links for language, handwriting, and name help. So here we are at that. I clicked on that language, names, handwriting, and script. And so there's 77 links here that might contain something of assistance to me. You can see that the BYU script tutorial is one of those. It's one of the most well-regarded script tutorials worldwide. So now let's talk about the fact that sometimes our ancestors had a change of name because somebody wrote their name down phonetically or something. But sometimes there were name changes that were done on purpose of a legal sort of a nature. And so there are record types that you would want to be looking for where name changes might have been mentioned as you're working your way always from the present backwards through the past. And you may run onto the point where your ancestor's name changed. When somebody comes to me for help at the library or in my private practice, and they say to me, well, this is my surname and I'm German. I go, well, you may be German, but that surname isn't. That name has had something happen to it along the way, and we'll need to figure out what that was before we can plant you on the German soil. So That's the importance. So some of the, as you've had a chance to look at this list, some of the places that a name change might be visible would be adoption records, court records, divorce records. There are legal name changes at times that are recorded. Marriage records, especially, you'll see the wife change her surname. The military men in Sweden, particularly when they joined the military, were assigned a military surname. And so you need to learn how to work with those to figure out what the original surname was so you can go backward if Sweden is your place. Naturalization records. So people, this isn't often mentioned. Most often when people are looking for naturalization records, they think it's the most important thing they'll find on there is the place where their ancestor was from. But actually on the naturalization paperwork, they were, asked, do you want to change your name? What name do you want to be listed as, on the paperwork as? So there was a chance right then and there where they may have changed their name as well. Newspapers will show that if there was a court procedure. Sometimes people are listed by an alias for good or bad reasons. Pension records, you'll see that a lot of times, that people who were serving in the military, a lot of people served in the military and were granted, if they survived the expedition, they were granted immediate naturalization. And so on their initial paper, as they served in the military, they might have been doing it under their original surname, but over the course of their lifetime, they might have anglicized that surname. And so their pension papers will list both names, generally speaking, the original name and then say alias. Alias has a bad connotation nowadays. It's like, I'm hiding out because I did something terrible. But in the beginning, it was just meant that here's another name this person was known by. So, and then passport applications will also show name changes typically. Sometimes there's an explanation of what the immigrant's original surname was and the name he now uses, especially because, on your passport application, they ask you the full name of your father. So if the immigrant's name doesn't match the father's name anymore, they would make a comment to explain why, because that would look odd to any officials checking that. So in the syllabus, you'll find links to a number of articles I found and resources for name change situations that I thought might be helpful and give you some ideas. I even put a couple of examples of legal name changes that are available that you can look at online, like New Jersey legal name changes there from 1847 to 1947, and New York State Archives records of name changes. So some different thoughts in there. So I also wanted to mention One Name Surname Studies. There's the Guild of One Name Studies that does this particularly. They're banded together as a group of people who do studies on one particular name only or one name only in a particular location. And then there's ISOG, which is, it's the DNA. It's a big DNA group, and they have Surname DNA projects, and then so does Family Tree DNA group projects. You can search or browse on their website an index of, they say, 11,293 projects related to a surname or geographical area of interest. So that would be worth taking a quick look at to see if you can pick up on somebody already researching your surname in your area. This is what the Guild of One Name Studies website looks like. It's a great place to check for help with surnames. They began long before DNA and have now incorporated that into their projects as well. So you might find a study being done on a surname of interest. The arrow is pointing to the word studies, which is where you could click and see what they've got going. They have a searchable list of the projects in progress. Now, you may have also noticed under genealogies on FamilySearch that there's information from this group posted there and searchable. Take a quick look at that. See, we're under genealogies on the ribbon at the top. And so you can just put in the last name. If it's a common name, you might want to put in a first name and a location and just check out what you can do with the information posted there. This group documents everything. So if you're lucky enough to be related to people that they're studying, then you would have research that would be very impeccably done. This is that International Society of Genetic Genealogy wiki, and this is their page on Surname DNA projects. You can look through. You can see some of them listed over here. There's more as well. And that's what the Family Tree DNA project, group project looks like. You could even start a project if you wanted to on your surname and your location of interest. It's a super rare name, which I actually do research a couple super rare names, and it wouldn't be unthinkable to actually do a worldwide study of a name like that. So there's their list of their number of projects, and there's the create a project button. Okay, so let's talk about surname considerations. Things that affect surnames are colonialism. Well, let me just back up to say, I wanted to talk about some considerations to keep in mind as we discuss surname resources for specific countries. It will make a difference if a country was a colony of another country, or if the current country was once part of another country, meaning the borders changed or who is in charge of it changed. The various ethnic and religious groups that make up or reside in a country will have an impact on the naming style. At least in their portion of the country. So just those things to keep in mind. I read an example of a situation where somebody came from, I think, the Netherlands. Then when the British took over, their name was kind of anglicized, but then they moved south, they moved to Louisiana and lived in a whole area which was mostly French people. And so in the records, their name was actually recast in French. That sort of thing happens. So you might want to notice if your ancestor is in a particularly ethnically strong place where their name they might have just changed their name to kind of fit in. So we're going to talk about surname resources by country now. This presentation and my syllabus focus mainly on Europe. I'll have to do a second class on other areas in the world. There's just too much material to go any further than this. But since a lot of us in North America have at least some of our ancestry from Europe, this was a likely place to start. So there are wonderful resources for many other countries as well. And the techniques that you saw me use here for locating information about the Netherlands, you could try that for any other place in the world that's not included in what I talk about today, you know. So Europe, according to the FamilySearch wiki, is divided into 5 regions, and I've arranged this presentation and the handout accordingly. The handout, the link to that is in the chat and will be posted with this presentation later, so it can be found if you go to watch it again. Okay. So we're only going to touch a portion of the material from the syllabus, so I invite you to look into it in more detail. We'll start with number 1 there, the British Isles. So the British Isles includes the countries and dependencies listed here. Some of them maybe you don't think about, but these are major segments of the British Isles. I wanted to just note that many people use the terms the British Isles and the United Kingdom interchangeably, and this is not correct. This is the Euler diagram of the British Isles, and I really like it because it helps you understand how this is laid out. So I gave you the link to this. Everything I talk about, the links in your handout. So you can see here that Great Britain is England, Wales, and I don't know why that little box is there. It's not supposed to be. But underneath that, it says Scotland. So it's just the one island. That's Great Britain. But if you add in Northern Ireland, that's the United Kingdom, okay? And then the British Isles, if you go further, that includes the Isle, you know, the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man, Jersey and Guernsey. Jersey and Guernsey are the Channel Islands, plus the Isle of Man. And then if you add in all of Ireland, then the composite of all of this stuff is what is actually the British Isles. So I hope that makes sense, and you'll be able to look back on that. I like to consult with that periodically. And now, you know, United Kingdom was established at a certain point in time, something like, I think, 1803. So before that time, this would be different. So you may need to, look at a historical map to figure out what's where when. So here are the more major languages of the British Isles. I can't even pronounce the name of some of those, and I'm not going to wound your ears by trying, but languages and cultures certainly impact names. And that is well to keep in mind. Okay, so this is another part of the Guild of One Name Studies pages. It's kind of a bibliography about surnames, and you'll find that something you can put your surname in here and get more information about that. Be sure to look over here on the left in that list of links for other items of interest. This is a website called the Geography of Surnames, and it includes English, Irish, and Scottish. So I recommend on this website that you click every tab in that row at the top. There's so many resources. There's an introduction followed by a section on place names, occupational surnames, surname themes, a fabulous list of recommended readings on this subject. And I wanted you to know that if you know the particular location in England that your family's from, those were peopled by different people. So they've got a whole section in Wikipedia, for example, on just Cornish surnames, because those are different than other British surnames. Cornwall had their own language, so that spills over into their names being different. I found a wonderful website called Old Family Names of the Channel Islands, and this has so much to offer. In the syllabus, I also have separate links for information on the surnames of Guernsey and Jersey. There's a lot of French background in these, since they're actually so much closer to France than they are to England. This is a book that I found this is from FamilySearch Books, or the digital library there. That is the title, that whole thing there. It says, Official Varieties and Synonyms of Surnames and Christian Names in Ireland for the Guidance of Registration Officers and the Public in Searching the Indexes of Births, Deaths, and Marriages. So if you've ever had trouble with any of those indexes in England, this will give you a clue as to how they set up all their indexes over there. And this is something, it's available through the FamilySearch digital library, and is publicly, when it says public, that means you can view it there. It's probably downloadable. It's 94 pages, and so that might be a helpful thing to just have on hand. This is an article from the Ancestry.com blog. A History of Irish Surnames is yours here. I like to read articles like that and just get a feel for things. Here's another one of those books on different, this is Manx names, which means names that come from the Isle of Man. So if you click in the drop-down arrow by the gear wheel up here in the upper right-hand corner, and you will see the ways that you can use this book. You can download it in an EPUB format, an ebook, or download it as a PDF. So this is a free book. And if you had Manx family, this would be awesome. The other option is you can just use it right online here and search through it right from here. So this is what it looks like on there. They have made it electronic. So these are all links, and you could go straight to the chapter or the topic of interest. That will take you where you want to go. This is Scotland's People, the section regarding surnames, and they've got several more links there to further information, so I recommend that. I'm a lot more Scottish than I thought, so I need to get with that. This is another free book available, this one through Hattie Trust Digital Library. It's called The Surnames of Scotland, Their Origin, Meaning, and History by George F. Black. And it shows here that you can download this book and you can choose the format. You can also search it right online there. That's a beautiful website for you to use. I am not going to try to pronounce the name of that website, but this is help for Welsh surnames. And if you've ever done Welsh research, you know you need help with the surnames. They're either very different than anything you're used to or way too common. So I found an article which caught my attention. Welsh surnames. Why are there so many Joneses in Wales? I always wondered that myself. I have a Jones line myself. So they will take you through how Welsh naming got the way it is, and that will be of help. Okay, now we're into Central Europe. You can see here we've got Austria, Belgium, the Czech Republic, Germany, Hungary, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia, and Switzerland, basically. And so here we dive in. Here's Austria. You'll find that gender can affect Germanic surname endings. An example from my family is the surname Best, which is the way the males would be called. But if it's a female, there will be an IN added to the end, Besten. And I've run onto that, especially in the 17 and early 1800s. So the other thing I can tell you about Austrian names is Austria is a Germanic country, so you want to see Germany in the syllabus for more suggestions about Germanic surnames. Here's Belgium. There may be more than one official language in a country. This will result in differing styles of surnames. And finding out the ethnicity of your surname might help you determine which part of the country would be the likely point of origin. A history of that area might help you determine where they came from even before that. There may be maps that will help you. Remember, an area may have been in more than one country over the course of time. In fact, in Europe, it's almost a certainty. So you see the three official languages of Belgium today: French, Dutch, and German. These are historic languages of Belgium that still exist in little pockets around Belgium. So the French-related languages, the Walloon, Picard, Champenois, and Lorraine, and then the unofficial Germanic languages are Flemish, Limburgish, Lodic, Luxembourgish, Marls, and Yiddish. So let's look at a couple of maps here. This is one I found on Wikipedia showing you the ethnic origin of the people of Belgium. So you can see the Dutch part, not surprisingly, is at the top, just below the Netherlands, right? And the French is below that. And then on the edge, closest to Germany, that's where there's a small German population. But here's another map showing you more of where those different other languages that I mentioned to you fit in the scheme of this. So the Flemish, West Flemish is over here, Limburgish on this side of the Dutch part at the top. Anyway, I included links to all of these in case anybody was interested. Now, another resource for Belgian and French naming information is GeneaNet. So that has a feature for learning more about surnames, and that's the page you're looking at right here. You can also search in GeneaNet by country. They've got things for all over the place. Here we are at Czech names here. This is Wikipedia, and I find that a lot of the Wikipedia articles, if you just look for whatever country and then put name, they have really neat maps like this to show you different things about the names in that country, or they have links to other resources. So this one is for the Czech names here. There's another website, Czech Genealogy, has some really good information about what to expect, how their surnames developed. Here we are at Germany. And so if your ancestors were German, which Germany did they live in? Because Germany changed all through the course of time. In fact, it didn't get to where it is now until after World War II, which is pretty recent as far as country borders go. So on the left is the empire map when Germany was at the maximum size at the beginning of World War I. And on the left is today's map of Germany, which is noticeably smaller. So knowing when they came over to America will tell you what Germany they left. And it would be helpful for you to find a map from that time frame and see what you're dealing with. So This article points out that in different dialects of the same language, surnames may be spelled differently. This may serve as a clue to the place of origin for your ancestor. I noticed an interesting thing. My German ancestors are largely Catholic. And so I've dealt with loads of Catholic records. And I noticed something like suddenly the surname the spelling is changed. And I noticed that sometimes happened when a new priest came. So I would look at the new priest's name and go, oh, he's not a local boy, because I knew all the families. It's a kind of a small valley where my ancestors come from, and they're all Catholic there. And so, I could recognize a name that I haven't seen before. So I thought, oh, this man is spelling the names the way he would spell, the way he learned to spell them, where he comes from. So that was something to keep in mind when you're dealing with the records of another country. In German, there's a number of letters that are interchangeable, and that could greatly affect the way somebody spelled a surname coming from somewhere. What we have to keep in mind, what I'm always reminding myself, is that my ancestors were probably illiterate. And so they would just say their names to the recording official, and they would get written down. And so that's why there would be so many different versions of the name. Now, here's sometimes you can find books that are helpful, that are available free online. I found this one at Internet Archive. And it's where you can actually download it for an hour or a week or two and study it. There's a 40-page preview of this book available on Google Books if you just wanted to see a few pages that way. But Internet Archive is free to use. So this is another helpful book on German names. It's called German Names, A Practical Guide. So you'd want to look for these and other books in your local or university library, or possibly use interlibrary loan to borrow them to use. This is Hungary. Notice that Hungary uses Eastern name order, meaning that when they give their names, they give them surname first. They use one last name and one first name. So in the Hungarian scheme of things, the name would be listed like this. Put a couple here, but if you saw those listed English style in America, or in an index that was made up by someone with an English background, they would likely look like this. His name, and Janos is John, so that would be the Americanization of that name, and Maria, of course, Mary, and believe it or not, Kovacs is the name for Smith. When knowing that Hungarians do their names in Eastern name order, if you're using actual Hungarian records, this is something you need to know so that you're not missing your family name in an index. It's always a good idea to look both ways, just to make sure you're not missing anybody. Yeah, because we cannot know for sure if the person who indexed the Hungarian records did how they did that exactly. This example also makes the point that immigrants often anglicized their names and did it pretty quickly. If your ancestor has a non-US birthplace in the census, say, but the name doesn't match, you need to consider how it might have been altered, when and where. This is a wonderful website I found called Hungarian Names 101. It has a lot to offer. You'll want to click across those tabs at the top. This is some of the contents there. Origins of the Hungarians, the language, the alphabet, constructing a Hungarian name. The first shall be last, emphasizing that point about Hungarian name order, and gives you an idea of common men and women's given names and that sort of thing. So it was really interesting as I went through that website. There's this another website called Your Guide to, well, this is a page at a much larger website that has research aids for a lot of different countries, but this is their page for Your Guide to Researching Hungarian Ancestors. And some of the things you can click on there to find out more. Let's talk about the Netherlands. This is a wonderful 1815 to 1830 map where you can see the various areas and even Luxembourg there. Okay, so a little bit about Dutch surname history. They were not required, as I referred to earlier, they were not required to have surnames until 1811 when Napoleon insisted. But in some areas, patronymic names were in use, which was based on the name of a father or a grandfather. The male surnames would end in sen, and the female surnames ended in dochter, dochter. So, example of each of those, Janssen and Jandachter. When the Dutch took a fixed surname, they often renamed, I found this and it's super helpful, they often retained the patronymic as a second name. So when you see a name like a girl, but she has this male-looking name as the second name and then the surname, that's more than likely her father's given name, which is really a nice, helpful clue. The Swiss kind of do that as well. The interesting thing about when they took their surnames permanently, some of the children would have been out and married already and already been using the patronymic name from their father. There would be children who were still at home. Not all of them might have selected the same surname. So this is where you end up with siblings who had different surnames, and you may be fooled into thinking they're not siblings. So you need to go back in time to the point where all those people are still at home if you can and try to see them that way. But just keep in mind that that sort of thing happened. That also happened in the Scandinavian countries as well. So most names, when they chose a name, were based on an occupation or a location. And they created name registration records, and many of those have been filmed, as I showed you an example of before. So, but how do you locate those? Let's go through a little example of that. So here we are at the catalog. I looked up the Netherlands, and this is for the surname records for the town of Groningen, which is where I do a lot of my Dutch research. And there is like a county and a city by that name, so that you see that twice in a row there. They have a one hit for names personal, and it says, yeah, you see that word there? After a while, you'll know that naam is naam, the word for name in Dutch. So you'll know that this is something to do with names. And it turns out here that it's the civil registry of when Napoleon told everybody to do that in 1811. So the first round of recordings, I guess, took place in 1812 in Groningen. Then they have a book that's dated 1826 for more of those. That's kind of an interesting thing. The camera icon, here we're looking at those film numbers for those particular names and name adoption records here. The camera icon means that the images are available online. The magnifying glass on the third one means it has a searchable index. That's something to know. You could get a start on those online if you wanted to look at those. And I now changed the jurisdiction from the town of Groningen to the larger province. So there's only one Groningen there. And so they had three other things to look at. They've got the naming in Groningen on the county level. But here they have an onomastics committee. That's literally a name committee. They study names. And so this is information for that Royal Dutch Academy on that. And then there's studies on Frisian and Groningen surnames right there, which would be interesting to look at. So just so you know, a lot of times when you're on FamilySearch, they catalog things with their full out Dutch name or their German name. If you want to know what that really says in English, just do a right click. If you're using Google Chrome as your browser, all you have to do is right click and it'll say translate to English. You click on that, it'll translate any of these pages in FamilySearch, as well as other websites you might go on, because a number of the websites that I'm showing you and we'll show you next week were done in, say, Italy for Italians. And so we have to right click on them or see if they have a button to translate it to other languages. So not a problem. This is Talrehelen. These are the family name resources there at that website. And another really great source of information. They have websites. They actually have websites about names that they have links for there. This is the Dutch Name Bank, or the database of surnames in the Netherlands. You will have to right click on this one to change it to English. The site does do surname distribution mapping. We'll see some examples of that next week. You may recognize it. Well, you'll recognize this website when we get to it next week. It does contain a lot of information about Dutch surnames as well. Here we are at Poland. In Poland, the surname endings can tell you a lot. When our Polish ancestors came to an English-speaking country, they likely had to give up the various name endings to fit in, because people would think, well, that's kind of weird if a husband and wife don't have the same surname. But when you're looking in the actual Polish records, or possibly even, they went to ethnic churches when they got here, and those records were oftentimes kept in the language of the home country. So I gave you a couple of examples here. It says Polish grammar affects given names, surnames, and place names. So surnames are affected by gender endings, such as the following examples. So the family name Grela, that's the masculine version. And interestingly enough, if there's an unmarried woman by this name, it has its own version, and then the married version of it is the third version. So there'll be 3 versions of that family surname. So you could see that if they came to America, the dad might have this surname, the mom would have this surname, and any unmarried daughters would have the third version of it. So something to keep in mind. And then we're kind of familiar with, I think a lot of the Polish people just went to the male endings, the skis. But if you catch them early on, sometimes you'll see the ska, the female ending. And when you are searching in lists and indexes and stuff, it's worthwhile to search all the versions of these names, because you never know what got written down. So keep that in mind about Poland. Now let's talk about Eastern Europe. Look at all these countries there. And it's becoming quite possible to do research in these countries. More and more records coming forth. And so you'll need to know about where to find information for them. I love this website. It's called Blazing Bulgaria. Okay. It's very interesting. They have this you can see here is their section on Bulgarian names and naming customs. They have a lot in this website: geography, history, art, culture, language, and alphabet, as you'll see on the site, even food and drink. So if you have Bulgarian ancestry, you will enjoy finding that website. This is the website Bulgarica, with its section on Bulgarian names and naming patterns. I like to read several articles on the same topic because they're never identical, and I always learn something in each article that I didn't learn from the last one. Next, we're going to go on to Mediterranean Europe, or Southern Europe. So you see Andorra and Cyprus and France and Greece, Gibraltar, Italy, Malta, Monaco. This includes Portugal, San Marino, Spain, and the Vatican City. All right, so in France, we've talked about that before, how Napoleon was pretty pushy about surnames. And in France, the Jews were not ones to take surnames. They just were kind of patronymic in style. So he insisted that they take names in 1808. In certain areas of France, they have double surnames. In the Alps and the Pyrenees areas, they'll have a family surname plus a place or house or a nickname to go with that. If you have a French background, you'll need to find out about the concept of deep names or aliases to differentiate. A lot of French names were pretty common, so they take on what they call a deep name or an alias, a little extra name to go with it to differentiate that family from the other families by that surname. You'll see this often if you're researching in Quebec, in the French Canadian families there. And another thing that I learned about French surnames, they're often two-part names. They use le, la, or du, or de la. And if they have that in front of them, there is always a space between that and the body of the surname. But you don't know. Sometimes indexers decided to drop the spaces out and whatnot. So you'll want to search both ways, just so you don't miss anything. In France, women, I guess, have always gone by their maiden names legally. They may use their husband's name, but only socially. So that's something that I really like, because it's not as hard to follow women's research like it is in countries who have taken up the British style of doing things, where women get very little credit for the babies they birth, and surnames don't generally get recorded except in marriage records. So this is an old map of the provinces of France, which have changed. These were abolished in 1800, but they're still culturally impactful as historical regions where like people settled together. So these represent earlier kingdoms, people who may have had their own language and naming conventions, and this may help you pinpoint a location. All right, let's talk about Greece for a minute. Greek names are influenced by Turkey, Spain, Italy, Albania, and Slavic areas. There are many ethnic groups in Greece. I guess, islands are like that. A lot of people end up landing at the islands. The regional differences from the residents of the various islands and areas that make up Greece. So I found this wonderful website called the Lexicon of Greek Personal Names. It has all kinds of, this gives you the background of the project, the way this project was set up, so you can get the most out of the information they have. They've got, I clicked on the actual name section. So then these are the different parts of that where you can get specific on different areas of names and naming practices, formation of names, meanings of names, later developments, modern Greek names. That could be really important to watch your surname change over the course of time, not lose track of the family. Here we are in Italy. Women use their maiden names in the majority of documents, even after marriage. They sometimes have a second surname, Italians. You may see that the terms detto, vulgo, or dit, which is like the French dit names, in conjunction with those. They have special surnames they develop for foundlings or abandoned children. The most common one in Italian is Esposito, which means exposed, or trovato, which means found. Okay. Sometimes the pronunciation of names, Italian names, really takes a beating. If you're like me, I always heard the name Joe DiMaggio pronounced like that. But actually, in Italy, that name's pronounced DiMaggio. DiMaggio. There's no EO ending on that. So you could see where that might affect how something got written down phonetically, or where you might look for it spelling-wise. And this next name down here, the second example, it looks like it should be Schiavo, but it's actually Schiavo. So in Italian, the SCH gets a K. That CH is a K sound. So that could really throw research. I'm just throwing in a few examples so you can see why it's so important to really get to know things better. Oh, these are some more of the names for foundling children. They finally outlawed giving them these names that were like unfortunate and that sort of thing, to give them a fair chance. So they switched to names that were more cheerful, like welcome and comforted up there, conforte and benvenuto. This Italian heritage website is a lot of fun. It has a fantastic section on names. You can see that you can actually, if you know the sort of region where your family was from, you can search by region. They have a section where you can click to learn more about the etymology of the surname. And then they have the categories of their surnames here. And so you can learn more about that. There's another website called Italian Genealogy Online, has a major section called Italian Names in Italy. So there's so many, this is just the top of the list. You can see that whole thing just below the word search for your name in Italy, just a ton of links for Italian name research. Now here we are in Portugal. Now historically, daughters were commonly given their mother's surname, interestingly, and sons were given their father's surname. So I think if you didn't know that, you could get awfully confused. So it's a good thing to do some background research and find out how they use their surnames. It was also common for children to receive both of their parents' surnames. So when this combination occurred, the mother's surname would typically precede the father's surname. It's the other way around in Spain, generally. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay. Women tended to retain their maiden names throughout their life. In the late 19th century, it became common for women to adopt their husband's surname, but they found out that they didn't really like that, so they let that practice go. And by the end of the 19th century, they were going back to keeping their maiden names. But this may be why you see, say, the mother of the family's name both ways, depending on the time frame, when they were experimenting with having the women use married names. So this is the article from Wikipedia on Portuguese names, and it gives detailed information not only about Portugal, but also about how naming works in the former Portuguese colonies, such as Brazil. So that could be important. Now, here we are at Spain. So the typical Spanish surname has 4 parts. It has a first given name, a second given name, because they're Catholic and they have to have a saint name, right? And then they have the father's surname and the mother's surname. A married woman actually keeps her maiden surname. So often the practice is to give one given name and the first surname most of the time. I give an example here. And then the complete name is typically reserved for legal, formal, and documentary matters. So, which is good because I'm sure it gets burdensome to have to put all those names on. Use all those names everywhere. Let's talk about Scandinavia or Northern Europe for a moment. And these are the locations we're talking about. Denmark and its Faroe Islands, Finland, Iceland, Norway, including Jan Mayen and Svalbard Islands, and then Sweden. Nordic Names is a one-stop shopping event for Scandinavian surnames. I just love it. There's sections for surnames and given names. Here's the surname section. Just plug your surname in there. There are links by country and by topic. Right there. One thing I guess I left out was there is one more set of surnames for that area, and they're called Sami names. And Sami are they used to call them Laplanders. They're the people who live very, very, as far up as anybody can live near at the top edges of Finland and Norway. And they're, I guess you'd call them, they're sort of the native peoples there. And so they even have a section on semi-surnames here. Oh, it's interesting. Now, Denmark, the first permanent surname law was passed in Denmark. In other words, where they had to switch from the patronymic stuff they've been doing, was passed in 1828. Most patronymic surnames end with SEN or DATTER. The suffix dater could be shortened, and this is true for all of the Scandinavian countries, to either D period, DR, DTR. The first spelling reform in Denmark, believe it or not, was in 1872, with additional changes in 1872, 1889, and 1948. What does that mean? Well, they used to use a lot of double letters, and so one of the examples of that down here is they use an A with a little circle above it, a diacritical, or in the lowercase form, was added to the alphabet in 1948, replacing that double A. So they do that. I really like that. The Netherlands did a lot of spelling reform as well, but it will change the way you see surnames. And so kind of nice to know that sort of thing occurred. I kind of wish we could clean up English, actually, get rid of some of the silent letters, right? In Finland, the first law requiring permanent surnames for all Finnish citizens was passed in 1921. Western Finland was more likely to use patronymic surnames, and they prevailed for a long time into the 1800s, and a lot of those people just took as a fixed surname. In Eastern Finland, family surname, they had surnames passed down to generation from very early on. And the endings of those names are what you see here. I can look at a name and know A, if it's Finnish, and B, if it's Eastern Finnish, because of these spellings. So that's kind of a helpful thing if you have to deal with Finnish at any. The types of they have 3 types of surnames. They have short names, which a lot of times are an animal surname, like squirrel or woodpecker or crane, They have short names with an ending. You probably have seen that NEN ending. That's a real giveaway, or this AINEN ending. That's a real giveaway that you got an Eastern Finnish surname. And then they have geographical names, including farm names, and they also have those, and they have the Länen ending on them. As a couple of examples of that here. So that's just some simple things that would help you a lot with Finnish research. I found a wonderful website called Scandification, and it has a Finnish surname section, a guide to Finnish last names. Here we are in Norway. As early as the 1600s, certain classes of people had fixed surnames. During the end of the 19th century, people began adopting fixed surname. The first hard fast law was passed in 1923. Most of the population used patronymic surnames, which are derived from the father's given name, and a suffix to identify the child's gender, SEN and dater. Surnames were frequently abbreviated in records, especially those endings, as we mentioned before. And the spelling was not really standardized in Norway, believe this or not. Spelling in general was not standardized until 1917. So you are going to see some different versions of names due to that alone. So I found a wonderful site called Norway Heritage. In the Hands Across the Sea section, there's a part called Those Norwegian Names, Tips for the Online Researcher. So something to explore if you are involved with Norwegian heritage. Here we are in Sweden. Once again, nearly totally patronymic in the naming style, or matronymic. I'm much more familiar with Swedish, having done a lot of Swedish research at one point. And I noticed that if a child was illegitimate, you'd get a surname, but it would be matronymic. So it would be based on the mother's surname. So when you see a child with a female-based last name, that gives you the understanding that at some point in time, there was an illegitimate child, and that's how that name got started. Now, they had soldier names. They needed unique names there, and a lot of them had the same surnames because when they're based on a handful of given names, and that became a problem during military operations. So as I said previously, they were assigned a soldier name, and I've given you some links for information about finding out more about those. Sometimes their names were farm names that they took on, and sometimes their name changed when they moved from one farm to another. That's the place, the farm name where they were living would be dropped off the end of their patronymic name, and then the new one installed. I've even seen cases where men who they were not the firstborn child, only the firstborn son had the right to take up his father's land. So sometimes a man would have the privilege to marry into a family of only daughters, and so he would actually take on the name of his father-in-law or that farm because he was going to be the one that would take over running it eventually. And so you need to learn things like that about the different countries. My cousin Sharon's husband, they started out with a patronymic surname, but they were granted the right to use the name Lanier, which comes from their occupation. They were linen weavers and cloth manufacturers. The changes in Sweden began as early as 1860. They had the actual Names Adoption Act in 1901. Sometimes in their names, the male names had the double S, S-S-O-N, and the female version of that was D-O-T-T-E-R, not, with the O version, not the A version. There are regional differences in Swedish. Some names end up having more of a sound like a name from one of these other countries. Sometimes the name endings, you'll see here, be L or EL or ERL or LE or LI in those Germanic style names. So Sweden is a Germanic country. All of the Scandinavian countries are Germanic. So Swedish naming customs, this is a presentation available at FamilySearch.org. And I gave you the link to that. If you wanted to learn more from a man, you can see here from his middle name here, he looks like he actually is Swedish or Scandinavian. And that's what I have for you today.